Friends are invited to introduce themselves in the chat. We invite friends to share their name, location, and meeting or church if they are so led. We are so glad that you are here with us. My name is Lauren Brownlee, and I am Deputy General Secretary at the Friends Committee on National Legislation. I am also a member of Bethesda Friends Meeting, which is a part of Baltimore Yearly Meeting. And I am thrilled to welcome you to our February Quaker Changemaker event, FCNL's work toward just peace in Israel-Palestine. And before we get into the content of the event, I will ask my colleague, Lindsay Bensick, to share how we'll gather this evening.
Good evening. Hi, friends. My name is Lindsay Bensick, and I am the Governance, Community, and Culture Administrative Assistant here at FCNL, and I will be running technology for tonight's event. I have a few tech considerations for us. First, say hello in the chat. I see many of you are already doing so. You're invited to share your name, pronouns, location, and a land acknowledgement, a resource for which I will paste in the chat. As you can see, we are recording this evening's speaker portions, but the audience will not be included in the recording for privacy reasons. Even so, feel free to turn off your video if you are uncomfortable keeping it on. Caption is available automatically. If you do not want to see captions, you can click More in the Zoom toolbar, go to Captions, and then click Hide Subtitles. We'll have some time for you to ask questions towards the end of the event. We'll do our best to address as many questions as we have time for, but we likely will not get to all of them. But please submit your questions in the chat, include your name, location, as well as your meeting and church affiliation, if any, and I will direct them to our panelists. If you're calling in on the phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand. And if you have a question you would like to ask during our Q&A portion, we will unmute you and invite you to ask your question via telephone. Please contact me if you are in need of Zoom tech support. You can private chat me from Zoom's chat bar, or you can email me at lbensick@fcnl.org. Back to you, Lauren.
Why, thank you. We will now begin our time together with some grounding worship. So if you could join me in some settling silence. You, friends. It is always so wonderful to see such a full room in spaces to talk about this topic of just peace for Israel and Palestine. This was a program that I very eagerly volunteered to moderate, both because of our esteemed panelists and because this is a topic that has been close to my heart for many years. As some who are on this call know, I first became committed to working toward just peace in Israel and Palestine in my first year as a teacher. In 2007, I was teaching ninth grade history, which was a class called The West and the World. And in that class, I had a student who was Palestinian, half Palestinian, and he and his best friend every day would turn every topic that we encountered into something that related to Palestine. And they would say, here's how this is like Palestine, and here's how this is like Palestine. And they were having a very hard time imagining peaceful solutions. They couldn't see a way to adjust peace through peaceful means. And I said to them, it was at Civil Friends School. And I said, we're at a Quaker school and we take this approach of just peace. And they said, you don't know what you're talking about. Just not possible here. So I went to Georgetown University and got a master's degree in global, international, and comparative history. And my focus was on conflict and conflict resolution in the Middle East and Africa. And my master's thesis was on nonviolent activism in Israel and Palestine. And so ever since then, I have been finding ways to plug in to this work through the Quaker Palestine Israel Network, through an Israel Palestine committee in my yearly meeting, through work in my monthly meeting, lots of ways to be a part of solutions for just peace. And that has been a very meaningful part of my life, including a trip that I got to take to the region in 2018 through the Quaker Palestine Israel Network, where I got to be in both Israel and the West Bank for a month. And it was a transformative experience. And so when I've heard Bridget and Hassan talking about their recent trip, it felt so important that we provide opportunities for them to share about their experiences and all that they brought back from that. So that is at the heart of what this Quaker Changemaker event is about. But then we also realize that in presenting the information of this moment, it's really important to take a historical contextual look at that. And so we have invited in Jonathan Evans to be a voice for that. And we are also lucky enough to have Deb and Jim Fine with us, who are also voices for that. And so I will now introduce this esteemed panel that I just spoke to you about. First, Bridget Moix is the General Secretary of FCNL. She is a passionate Quaker peace advocate, activist, and mother. Bridget joined FCNL this time around in January of 2022. She brings with her 25 years of work on international peace and conflict issues with a focus on U.S. foreign policy. Prior to joining FCNL, she served as the U.S. Executive Director of Peace Direct from 2015 to 2021. She also served as Senior Legislative Secretary for FCNL's Foreign Policy Program, 2002 to 2006 and 2008 to 2012. She developed FCNL's Peaceful Prevention of Deadly Conflict Program and co-founded the Prevention and Protection Working Group, a coalition of more than 250 human rights, religious, humanitarian, anti-genocide, and peace organizations. Bridget is a phenomenal leader who we are thrilled to have speaking on this panel tonight. Hassan El-Tayyab is an author, songwriter, and FCNL's legislative director for Middle East policy and an advocacy organizer. Hassan leads FCNL's work to end U.S. military involvement in the Saudi-led war on Yemen, advocate for Palestinian human rights, and advance diplomacy with Iran. Hassan was honored by Arab America Foundation as an awardee of its 2022 40 Under 40 initiative for his policy work on Capitol Hill. His passion for foreign affairs is rooted in his desire to make life safer for people in the Middle East, including his extended family in Jordan, Palestine, and Yemen. Again, Hassan is an inspiration to everyone on our staff with the commitment that he has shown far before this most recent crisis to this region and to this work. Jonathan Evans is also someone that we hear about often as an inspiration, as I have been in the Quaker spaces that are passionate about this topic. Jonathan Evans and his family moved to Jerusalem in the summer of 1992 with one child and left 5 years later with 3 children. While there, Jonathan served as the Catholic Relief Services country representative for Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza. The family attended Ramallah Friends meeting, and Jonathan served on the Ramallah Friends School Board. Jonathan has since returned to the Middle East on short-term assignments with the American Friends Service Committee and the Friends Committee on National Legislation. Jonathan is a member of Westtown Monthly Meeting, Philadelphia Yearly Meeting. And then helping us to answer questions in the chat as they arise during the program and helping to answer questions during the Q&A are Deb and Jim Fine. Deb and Jim Fine have lived in the Middle East for a total of 14 years, beginning with their junior year abroad at the American University of Beirut in the wake of the 1967 Arab-Israeli War. They have served with the American Friends Service Committee in Jerusalem, with Ramallah Friends School, and with Mennonite Central Committee in northern Iraq. Jim was also FCNL's Middle East lobbyist from 2006 to 2010, and their most recent visit to Israel and Palestine was March 2023. This is, as I said, another pair of people who, when people are talking about this work in Quaker spaces, are talked about with such love and admiration because of the influence that they've had. And with that, I say thank you, all of you, both panelists and audience, for being here, and let's dive in. The first question that I have for our panelists is, could you each speak to what brought you to this work toward just peace in Israel-Palestine? And how have you been engaged in the work through Quaker contexts? So whoever would like to begin. Jonathan, why don't we begin with you?
Oh, thank you, Lauren. I'm happy to start it off, and I'm really grateful to be here with everybody. I guess in addition to what Lauren shared, I'll add that I actually first came to Middle East work when I was right out of college, and I went to Washington, D.C. to serve as an intern to FCNL lobbyist Francis Neely. And we worked on a range of international and foreign policy issues, including support for UNIFIL, which stands for the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon. So UNIFIL, this interim force, was established in March of 1978 and is still present on the Lebanon-Israel border. I'll also add that over the past 15 years, my focus has been on leading and participating in 2-week trips, for the most part, 2 weeks, that are built around listening and processing widely diverse stories, narratives, and perspectives from Israelis and Palestinians. The most recent trip was in March of 2023. It was sponsored by the Friends Council on Education, and relates very much to what Lauren was sharing about her getting into this line of work through teaching. And on that trip, Deb and Jim Fine were co-leaders with several others of us. And I'll unite again with Lauren in saying there's nothing like being physically present in Israel and Palestine and engaging with the people. And for those who are willing and able to have that experience, I highly recommend it. Back to you.
Bridget?
So I'll jump in and we'll go oldest to youngest here, maybe, or something. I don't know. But I'll follow on and say that I actually feel like a newbie in a lot of ways to Middle East peace work, because although I have a long background in peace building and various peace and justice advocacy issues, and have been around the circles of Quaker work on Middle East peace, it has not been a focus of mine. And this was, and in that fact, I kind of said, there's so many good people working on that, I'm just going to let them do it, because it's complicated and it's challenging. But anything that I have learned from people on this call and in the audience. And I was reflecting that actually my first encounter with Quakers and Quaker peace work was with an AFSC, American Friends Service Committee, in Philadelphia in 1995 as an intern during my college junior year. And I was an intern with the Middle East program. And I worked with Kathy Bergen. And it was my first introduction to learning about the situation in the Middle East. And so I was properly indoctrinated by Quakers from the beginning. And this trip then, coming to this trip really was my first time, aside from being in Beirut briefly, was my first time though in the region. And it really makes a difference to be there, as people have said, to see and to listen and to learn from the communities there. And so certainly I now feel a level of deeper commitment and dedication to this work, which of course is a priority for FCNL in our advocacy, but is certainly still a learning journey for me.
you, Hassan.
Thanks. And what a trip it was. It was so incredible being in the region with Bridget. Um, I've had a long, windy road to this issue. It's almost divine providence, and I'm here working on this now. As mentioned on the top of the call that, my family is from Jordan. My aunt is from Jenin, a family in Yemen. And this is not an abstract place for me. It's not a statistic. It's a place where people I really care about are from. And we go on these trips and you have all sorts of new contacts, friends, connections. Many of you may have worked with me on the war in Yemen. And for a long time, when I first got to FCNL, the Israel-Palestine conflict just seemed so intractable, where, of course, I wanted to lend my voice where I could, but it seemed like there's an opening here on Yemen. But while we were doing all that work with FCNL, building support for the war powers, trying to cut off Saudi Arabia, in our hearts, a lot of folks in our coalition were thinking, if we can set up some precedents, like, passing resolutions to block weapons to Saudi Arabia, work on the Saudi blockade of Yemen, try to resolve the conflict there, that maybe we can create some tools and some legislative history that we can apply on Israel-Palestine. And that's sort of what we've been doing, and we want to continue that work. So FCNL has been an incredible, home for me as I've grown and developed my skills as an advocate. And last thing I'll say, I really resonate with what Jonathan said. When you're there in the region, it just takes on this whole new life for you. And I did go on this trip in 2024 with Bridget, but I had been there in April and May of 2022, and that really just opened up my eyes to the suffering that's going on, the beauty that is all across the Holy Land in Israel, Jerusalem, West Bank. Unfortunately, I didn't get to Gaza. And really spending time at the Ramallah Friends School. There were children I met in 2022, and I got to have conversations with them in 2024, and so impactful, so meaningful, and really inspires me to keep going with this work.
Thank you to all of you for your work toward just peace. Jonathan, this next question is specifically for you. As we shared at the beginning, Bridget and Hassan just went on a trip to the region. And one of the things that I loved when I heard upon their return was they're talking about how when they shared that they were coming from a Quaker organization, that people said, oh, the Quakers. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what work Quakers and FCNL specifically have done in the region that helps to catalyze that response when the word Quaker is shared in those spaces.
Thank you. It's a great question, and I'm going to dive right in because it's going to be tough to cover this one in a short period of time. I'll start by saying that from my perspective, the main reason that Bridget and Hassan and so many others of us have gotten positive responses when we identify ourselves as Quakers in Israel and Palestine is that we have truly let our lives speak, and we've demonstrated a steadfast and caring long-term commitment. And I would say that that commitment over the decades has taken us back and forth from there to here and from here to there, as we've advocated for equality, justice, and peace. And I want to take this time to focus on three very concrete ways in which friends have let our lives speak in that part of the world. The first would be through the involvement of Quakers across many, many organizations. Second, involvement through Ramallah Friends School. And third, through AFSC, CUNO, and FCNL. So I can think of Quakers who have been directly and deeply involved with a wide range of humanitarian and peace organizations, both local and international, in Palestine and Israel. There's nowhere near enough time here to list them by name, but I came up with around 25 organizations, and I'm sure that there are many, many more. And this broad and deep involvement of friends was brought home to me over the past several months since October 7th and the following violence, when around 15 former NGO colleagues, 4 of them Quakers, and all of whom had managed large projects in Gaza and the West Bank funded by USAID, the US government, came together to write an opinion piece that was published a month ago in the LA Times. And in that piece, we raised our alarm that US taxpayer money is being used to provide the weapons that are destroying lives and projects in Gaza. They're killing the very same people and destroying the very same life-giving projects that were funded by US taxpayers over previous decades in the name of building for peace. We went on to urge the US government that US government funding be devoted instead to diplomacy to address the root causes of the conflict, the future of refugees and of Gaza, the West Bank, and Jerusalem. So I think you're going to hear this echoed later on, and it probably sounds familiar to you. So let me turn to Ramallah Friends School, AFSC, CUNO, and FCNL, more or less in that order. If you're interested in some of what I'm going to highlight and knowing more, additional details can be found at a timeline of Quaker involvement in the Middle East, which is on the Middle East Collaborative section of Philadelphia Yearly Meetings website, courtesy of a project that was led by Jim Fine. So the seeds of early American Quaker involvement in that part of the world started with education, and it was planted by Sybil and Eli Jones, Quaker missionaries from Maine who first traveled to the Holy Land in 1867. And while they were in the area of Ramallah just north of Jerusalem, they met a young girl named Miriam who requested their help in setting up a school for girls. And in response, beginning in 1869, they established several training schools for girls in the Ramallah area, and those eventually became the Friends Girls School in Ramallah. And at the urging of the local community, later, the Friends Boys School was founded in 1901. They eventually merged and became one fully coeducational school in the early 1990s. So why do I focus on Ramallah Friends School? It's educated so many Palestinian leaders, past and present. And the school and Ramallah meeting have provided an experiential grounding, I would say, for many Americans for a lifetime of peace work. And a number of them actually are on this call as I watch some of the names come up of people who are entering from the waiting room. And I'm sure that folks on this call know of many others. So turning to AFSC, became very involved in Israel and Palestine while still in the midst of large-scale relief work in Europe in the 1940s. A man named James Vail traveled to Berlin in 1939 on behalf of AFSC as part of a Quaker effort to assist Jewish refugees. And almost 10 years later, in the spring of 1948, he was part of a small delegation that traveled to Egypt and Palestine on behalf of the AFSC and the Friends Service Council of London, at a time when armed conflict between Jews and Arabs was surging at the end of the British Mandate and just prior to the declaration of the establishment of the State of Israel in May of 1948. About a month later, James Vail returned to the Holy Land, accompanied by Harold Evans, who had been appointed by the United Nations as municipal commissioner, also called colloquial mayor, of Jerusalem under the two-state partition plan, one state for Jews and one for Arabs, with Jerusalem as a separate entity administered by the United Nations. And then responding to another request from the United Nations, AFSC was the initial lead relief agency in 1949-50, delivering humanitarian aid to Palestinian refugees in Gaza. AFSC's position from that time on has been that relief aid was necessary but not sufficient, and that only a political solution addressing the root issues of the conflict would bring peace. And in part from that belief came the establishment of CUNO, the Quaker United Nations office, one in New York and one in Geneva. Offices that today continue to promote quiet diplomacy and lift up the importance of international law and UN resolutions in reaching a political settlement. And from that belief also came three important publications that I think Quakers are known for, have been through the decades. Search for Peace in the Middle East, edited by Landrum Bowling, a name folks are probably familiar with. That was issued and published in 1970, followed by A Compassionate Peace, published in 1982, and then in 1989, with Everett Mendelsohn having taken the lead as the author. And then finally, the third, 20 years ago, When the Rain Returns, Toward Justice and Reconciliation in Palestine and Israel. That was produced by a working party that was co-clerked by Tony Bing and Jim Fine. So the intersection of the work of AFSC and FCNL is long and deep, as is the practice of partnering with like-minded organizations. That and this essential dynamic of it being both there and here was brought home to me just this past Sunday. My wife, Melissa, and I went to the Chestnut Hill neighborhood of Philadelphia to participate in a silent witness for peace. Upon reaching the Peace Park where the procession was to begin, I was both surprised and pleased to see Mary Ellen McNish, former AFSC General Secretary. Mary Ellen and I had just enough time to appreciate one another's presence and to recall our travel together to Iran in February 2007, a trip in which FCNL's Joe Volk and leaders of many other faith-based organizations participated. And then as Sunday's public witness was winding down, I was equally pleased and surprised to see former FCNL General Secretary Diane Randall coming across the Peace Park to greet Melissa and me. Diane and I had a few moments to remember our June 2011 trip to the Middle East, and then we both became teary-eyed when we recalled our time in Gaza and our meeting with my friends Nazem and Sabah and family. Nazem asked us at that time to convey this message to public officials in Washington and to FCNL's constituency. Just tell them we're human. Just tell them we're human beings. And so moving from there to here, we come full circle to Bridget and Hassan, who have just made a similar trip to Israel and Palestine. Back to you.
Thank you. So this next question is for Bridget and Hassan. Can you share about the Quaker presence in the region when you visited, and what you've seen since in your advocacy around how Quakers are speaking up for just peace in this moment?
Sure, I'll start and then turn it over to Hassan. I'll just say I want to underline what Lauren said about being on the trip and how humbling it was to hear people. We were meeting with very high-level political leaders, high-level religious leaders, civil society leaders in Israel and in Palestine, as well as in Lebanon and Jordan. And everywhere we went, we were greeted with, the Quakers, here you are again. And it was that consistency, and I think, as Jonathan so well expressed, that consistency of compassion and of a commitment to a just peace, to understanding and listening to all sides, and to upholding core principles of the human dignity and rights of all people in the region that people hold on to and understand is what we as Quakers bring into this work. We were able to meet with and spend time with Ramallah Friends School, and I'll let Hassan talk more about that, but I will just say that was an extremely powerful experience. It was my first night in the West Bank, first time at the school. In the evening before we met with the kids, we were there listening to gunfire in the streets, listening to jets overhead that were probably carrying US bombs that would be dropped in Gaza. And the next morning, Quaker volunteers and the faculty said, yeah, this is our normal reality. This is what we were living here. And yet they're holding on to and working very hard to hold on to the core testimonies of peace, of teaching nonviolence to the children, of being an oasis of hope as they call the school. And it really is, I think, that even in these very, very difficult times when the students and the faculty are really struggling. So I know Hassan will share more about that. I also had an opportunity to meet with American Friends Service Committee. And I'll say this was a delegation. We didn't quite explain the background on the trip yet, but the delegation was organized by Churches for Middle East Peace, which FCNL is part of. But they organized the schedule for the core of the trip. And we asked them to include Ramallah Friends School and also American Friends Service Committee, who we met with in Amman, their regional office in Amman. And I was so happy that they were they did that, and because I think people saw and heard some things that they might not have otherwise. And meeting with American Friends Service Committee staff, talking about the tremendous obstacles to humanitarian aid right now, talking about what the U.S. complicity and role looks like in the region, and how trying to do humanitarian work in the midst of this, as the American Friends Service Committee has been there for so long, trying to do this, what the real challenges are on a day-to-day basis. And we can tell more stories about that. But it was tremendous to see the commitment and determination to continue to provide support. There are AFSC staff still in Gaza, and they are providing aid to people in the midst of this. And every day they're also wondering if they're gonna, stay alive, and they're being displaced repeatedly. So that commitment of presence, of compassion, of the core of human dignity really is what I felt in connecting with the Quaker presence in the region. Hassan?
Thank you, Bridget. I spent a lot of time at the Ramallah Friends School, the delegation, just the logistics of it, where we spent a little time at Ramallah Friends, and then Bridget and Churches for Middle East Peace, they went to Jordan, and they had that meeting with AFSC, went on to Lebanon. But I hung back, we were, the two of us were covering a lot of territory. And just day after day, every morning for about 4 or 5 days, I would do these large assemblies at the Ramallah Friends School. I met with the 3rd grade, 4th, 6th, 7th, and 8th. And I had a speech prepared. I was ready to talk to them about a whole bunch of things. I was getting ready to lecture. And then it just occurred to me that I should be in listening mode. And that's really something that I learned at FCNL. I'm still learning, but I had to listen to these children, and they have a lot to say. They are extremely scared of what's happening in Gaza. There's a lot of trauma. I had probably half a dozen children cry to me, including the 3rd grade cousin of the Ramallah Friends grad that was paralyzed in Vermont. He got up in front of his whole class and said, "We don't understand why the U.S. is still supporting these crimes of hate." I had another child in the 5th grade say, "Why is Israel lying to their children about us? They don't even think we're a country." She paused on that word country, and her teacher later pulled me aside and said she probably meant human, but just didn't feel comfortable sharing that. So deep trauma, and in the face of all of this trauma, the faculty at the Ramallah Friends School, the headmaster, Ronnie and Maya, they are just doing just incredible work with open hearts, with just so much strength and dignity that, that I was just so blown away by it. What can I say? And, that is, to me, Quaker testimony, remembering that there is light in everybody, staying present with each person, with each child. And that's what I saw firsthand. So incredible legacy, the Ramallah Friends School, and the Quaker staff there, but also the Palestinian staff there are really trying to live up to those principles. As far as my advocacy, so coming back to that, which is, I'm still I'm actually in Bridget's office right now, overlooking Capitol Hill. And thank you, Bridget, for letting me borrow your office for this meeting. I was on the Hill all day today, and these are tough times on Capitol Hill. You know, this is a tough time for lovers of peace everywhere, and definitely for me. So I want to open up about that. And when I first started working at FCNL, you know, the Quaker testimony, which I was raised Christian. My dad's Muslim, but I was raised Christian. The seeing the light in everybody, the loving thy neighbor, no exceptions. This is a hard moment to really lean into those principles, but I truly believe, especially after that trip, that that's how we're going to get out of the mess we're in right now as a world. You know, Israel, Palestine, but we've got the war in Ukraine, situation in Yemen, situation all across the Middle East, really everywhere. It seems like things are spinning more and more out of control these days, and holding that candle of, you know, just civility and making sure that we don't lose that in the process, you know, as we're trying to push, you know, for the world we seek, which is one free from war. It's one where Israelis and Palestinians are living side by side. And that is something I'm trying to lean into every day. And, you know, I'm not perfect at it, but you know, being among all these incredible staff at FCNL and this Quaker legacy has just been really helpful as we try to wade through a very difficult time.
Lauren, do we have time to show the video of the Ramallah Prince?
Yes.
I think we will have to wait until the end, and we'll have a formal ending, and then there will be a post program showing for anyone who can stay. But in order to allow at least a little bit of time for audience questions, I want to direct us to our final question of this round, which is for all three of you. And Jonathan, again, we'll start with you about what you see as particularly Quaker about FCNL's approach to working toward just peace. And I think the heart of this question is trying to think about that there are lots of organizations that are doing this work right now. And what do you see as FCNL's in particular to do based on our Quaker identity and our, as I saw in the chat, someone referenced our commitments to anti-racism, anti-bias, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. How do those commitments and our identity as a Quaker lobby organization fit into our approach to the work? And then Bridget and Hassan, as you answer this question, if you could also talk about from your trip, what are your takeaways in terms of what particularly Quaker communities should be thinking about as we work toward just peace? So Jonathan, we'll start with you. And I'm going to ask all of you to do your best to be as concise as possible while still sharing the fullness of your brilliance.
I will do that. I will be succinct because I want us to get to that video. So I think we go about our work grounded in our testimonies and with a vision of the world to which we aspire. And that vision is so well articulated in the FCNL We Seek statements. And we stay grounded in that. And that makes it very Quaker. And I think as Hassan and others have referred to, you know, we stay grounded in our belief that there is that of God, that of the divine in each person. And we are practicing continuing revelation regarding our testimonies. And at the same time, I would say we're Quaker in that we're also pragmatic. And we know that we need to take specific actions in any given moment that will move us in a positive direction, but may not get us to that world to which we aspire.
I'll jump in. I think that part of what Quakerism leads us to do in our advocacy, and part of what this trip was about, it is truth-telling. And I think Quakers, even in the most difficult contexts, when we know we grapple ourselves with some of the questions in the chat, you know, grappling with how do we hold up the dignity of all, even in a situation where there's such a power imbalance. How do we balance that peace and justice? And I think what Quakers have practically done is tried to really understand what is going on, to listen and learn from those who are most impacted by the problems of the world, and then to speak that truth to power, to those in decision-making places, including Washington, D.C., to share that truth and to be very clear about what the facts are and what the realities are, and then to advocate for just and peaceful solutions. And that was, for me, certainly part of what this trip was about, was trying to understand the true reality of the situation better. We came away, I think, really clear that a ceasefire is absolutely the first and most necessary step. I came away having a background working with FCNL and also actually with the US government on atrocities prevention and genocide prevention, with a real clarity of the level of mass violence and systematic violence that is being perpetrated, and of US complicity in that, and that we need to speak to that. And to recognize that the situation right now is undermining peace and security, certainly for Palestinians and also for Israelis, that this, and for the whole region and for the US. But I don't think it's difficult to say this is not good for any of the people in the region. And I don't think we should be afraid to be truthful about the massive violence being perpetrated in Gaza and the US role in that, and to speak to that. So that was something that certainly I came away with. And the other thing about being practical in a Quaker approach, you know, it is about compassion and meeting human needs. And the situation of humanitarian aid and the obstruction of humanitarian aid, the cutting off of funding for UNRWA, these are real practical issues of saving people's lives that we are also advocating on, and need to continue that advocacy. But I'll turn it to Hassan to speak more.
Yeah. So what's Quaker about FCNL's approach to the work and peace and justice? I think Bridget and Jonathan said what's Quaker about it. Maybe I can get into a little bit more about the work. We are advocating for an immediate ceasefire to end this absolute horror show we're seeing in Gaza. That's a permanent ceasefire. You know, we support the Biden administration. They're pushing for a temporary ceasefire. That's not enough. We need a permanent one. We want an end to all of this escalation around the Middle East. We want to de-escalate Yemen, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, because this is a tinderbox waiting to go off. And there have been strikes just over and over again, 18 strikes this weekend on Yemen alone, and promises for even more. We need immediate humanitarian assistance and working to build up congressional support for that. We need to end US complicity in this devastation. That means we don't want to be sending weapons to Israel as it bombs children in refugee camps. We want to make sure that the blockade ends and that US support is not fueling any of that. There's a whole bunch of ways we're doing that. Ceasefire, we're tracking statements. We have 70 plus members of Congress calling for that. We have an even larger list calling for humanitarian access. We've also done no recommendations on the supplemental package to Israel. We are also supporting 502B of the Foreign Assistance Act to require the State Department do a full vetting of human rights violations by the Israeli government in this conflict. And there's a whole bunch more, but I wanted to put some of these words into practice so you know exactly how we're trying to carry this message on the Hill.
Thank you very much. And we'll start going into some of the audience questions. And I think we'll just have time for a couple, but one is someone quoting the event invitation saying, discuss how a ceasefire can stop violence, protect human lives, and prevent a greater regional conflict. Can you talk about how that element of our approach, that calling for a ceasefire, which happened really quickly, based on FCNL's grounding we seek statement and the work that had already been done, how does that call for a ceasefire stop violence, protect human lives, and prevent a greater regional conflict? And maybe Hassan, if you want to start with that one, and then Bridget and Jonathan and Jim, Deb, if you want to add anything.
So the ceasefire is what we actually need to be able to get humanitarian aid in, stop the bombings, get the hostages home, and stop the rise of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-Palestinian racism, and anti-Arab racism. And so that's a central piece of this. The administration, they're not there yet, as you know. And so what we're trying to do is build a lot of support on Capitol Hill, office by office, Republicans, Democrats, progressives, moderates, pro-Israel, pro-Palestine. We're talking to everybody. And that's the approach. So far, again, we've got 70 members of Congress. I don't know if we have any Pennsylvania folks here, but Rep. Dean just became our next member of Congress, calling for a ceasefire, did that today. And that pressure, I think, is absolutely critical, because we know that we're not going to de-escalate the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the Red Sea, and Yemen by more airstrikes. This is all connected to the situation in Gaza and will only continue unless we get the ceasefire. And, there's a lot of work, there's a lot of stuff happening behind closed doors, but, as a network, we've got lobbyists on the Hill, but our network collectively has sent 500,000+ emails to Congress. And that is a testament to Quakers and allies of Quakers who have taken action. And that's really the drumbeat we're trying to keep going. I could say more about the humanitarian aid piece where there's a lot there, but on ceasefire in particular, it's creating that groundswell to put pressure on our lawmakers to finally get this deal over the finish line.
I'll just add a couple things that we heard in the region on the trip. One is everyone there is clear from what we heard. And when I say everyone, all the folks that we met with, which includes Israeli human rights groups and Palestinians and others in the region, particularly faith leaders. Ceasefire was their number one ask as well. I mean, they were very clear. Thank you. They were thanking us for this work that we were doing. They were very clear that a just and lasting peace for the future, the release of the hostages, an end to occupation, whatever your need is, and whatever part of this people were most tied to, connected to, it can't happen without a ceasefire first. And so the ceasefire, people really were affirming that call as the necessary first step. And the other thing I'll say is that people in the region also very clearly were asking us to work on the U.S. policy and to work on U.S. policymakers. And as Americans and as people there visiting the region, we felt the weight of the U.S. role. And people would say the U.S. is the only one who can stop this. Now, we can debate that, but that there was a real clear call to us from the region when we were on the trip that there's a responsibility to put that pressure on the U.S. administration through Congress to try to get the U.S. to use all of its leverage to press for a ceasefire.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask one more question that has emerged in the chat, which is has also been answered very well in the chat, but I would love all of your take on this. That friends are often accused of either taking sides or can be accused of a both sidesism. I think there's both that about our approach, or being anti-Semitic for not supporting Israel. And how do we, especially in the face of some really serious violence and harm that is happening across the region right now, how do we stay grounded in our values as people are critiquing from all sides the approach that FCNL takes or that Quakers might be led to take, including we've gotten, I know, over 40 different minutes from meetings around the country. So Quakers are engaging in this very actively. And each time that you engage, you're going to get some critique. And so how do we navigate that and stay grounded in what our call is?
I don't know if you want me to take this first stab at this thorny question.
Please.
So, I think we have to start with just cutting everybody a little slack and giving every single person a bit of grace right now. This is such a hard time. I've got Israeli friends, I've got Palestinian friends, I've got friends on both sides of this ideological spectrum. It was funny, my friend has a kibbutz in Charlottesville. Don't ask me how or why. But I spent Thanksgiving with them, and I actually went on a hike with an IDF soldier that literally just got out of Gaza, and we went on this hike together. His dad's a settler, and I was surrounded completely, and by people that don't share ideologies that I have. And I did my best to really represent my perspective, why I want the ceasefire, and I started by listening and really trying to understand the pain. And what I heard is a lot of people are really traumatized right now over a really horrific attack on October 7 that FCNL condemned on October 8th. As soon as we could, finalize the statement, that was very clear, is that we have to stay rooted in supporting civilian life and civilian protection, whether they're Israeli, whether they're Palestinian, and call for this ceasefire. And that's been our North Star this whole time. And so many people have been so grateful for us holding that candle, saying something very clear, that we support a ceasefire because we want the hostages back. We think every one of those Israeli lives matter, and that all of these Palestinian civilians in Gaza don't deserve to be retaliated against. And also rooting our work in the framework of international law. This, to us, has just really helped, guide our work, guide our principle, and be steadfast and be respectful to people, even when they don't agree with us, which you'd be surprised happens sometimes. And one last thing, I think if you're getting kind of attacked from all sides, you might be doing something right.
I just want to chime in, and I just want to point out the consistency. I think part of what, I said this before, but I think part of what helps Quakers, even when people are disagreeing with us, is there is a consistency to our voice and our message. And so I want to point to the sign behind Hassan first. Really simple, really simple. War is not the answer. And this was our response. People will know, many FCNLers will know, after 9/11. And being in Israel, it felt like, oh wow, yeah, this is 10/7. This is the 9/11 traumatic, direct vulnerability and fear people are responding from. And our message is still, but war is not the answer. And that is still central and core. And then the sign behind me, love thy neighbor, no exceptions. We really believe that is possible. We believe that people, even with great differences, even through great violence and trauma, can repair a relationship, can live together peacefully. And so we're going to keep holding on to that as well.
Thank you. And because of time, I'm going to move us to the final question for our panelists, which is, in about a minute each, which I know is too short, could you share what gives you hope for a just peace in Israel-Palestine? And what is your call to action? What do you think friends can be doing who are here and those who we might be encouraging? What should friends be doing?
I'll lead off. I take great hope in the fact that Quakers and many others are stepping up once again. We got to be in this for the really long haul. And I take hope in the fact that there are organizations that are Israelis and Palestinians working together who are grounded in nonviolence, advocacy, activism to end the occupation and to support a to be determined political configuration that will allow Jews and Muslims and Christians, everybody living there, to share the land. And I think I draw hope every day, and periods within the day, by working with those organizations. The two I'm most involved in that I'll lift up, I think this may be in the chat already if I saw it, but Combatants for Peace, former Israeli soldiers and former Palestinian fighters, many of whom have been in prison for years, have laid down their weapons and they're working on this. Parent Circle Families Forum is bereaved Palestinians and bereaved Israelis. They've all lost close loved ones to the conflict. Most of them have gone through grieving, wanting to take revenge, which is the concept of the day of what's happening post October 7th. But they have transformed themselves into saying, if I go that direction, other families, other individuals will just be grieving the same way I have when I lost my son, my daughter, my mother, my father, my brother, whoever, sister. So I take hope with those folks. They're our partners.
I'm gonna ask the Fines to share next. People are craving your voices. So what gives you hope, or what are you hoping that people might, how are you hoping people might take action?
I'm just going to repeat what has already
There we go. We got it. Okay. We were not unmuted. Well, I mean, I would, two things stand out to me from the recent conversation. The first, war is not the answer. That is not only a statement of principled Quaker faith. That, in the circumstances that we have faced since 9/11 and which we're facing now, is a statement of shrewd policy analysis. It's realpolitik. War, from a practical feasibility perspective, is not the answer. Think how the American response to 9/11, the invasions of Afghanistan, taking over the whole country, and then the invasion of Iraq without any cause or justification. Think how that has caused the metastasis of Islamic extremism. The Islamic State was born of the American response to 9/11. Hezbollah in Lebanon was born of the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982. Didn't exist before. Hamas was born from the frustration of the Palestinian Authority and the Madrid and Oslo process to achieve a Palestinian state. And what in God's name is Netanyahu's assault on Gaza going to spawn?
You're right.
War is simply not the answer from a practical political view. And while friends are led to that by their faith, we can also point to many fellow travelers in the policy analysis community, in the military, who agree and who are arguing with all of their power that these reactions, these policies, are creating far worse situation than they're resolving. So I think we are on the right track. We have many allies in the military establishment, many allies in the foreign policy establishment. We are involved in a struggle in the public arena. And when people jump into that, they need to expect that they are going to get some criticism. Some of that criticism will be genuine, heartfelt, real distress at what we are saying, and with, I think, a great deal of misunderstanding. But some of that criticism will be strategic from our political opponents who are advocating that war is the answer. We are engaged in a political struggle, which friends are happy to engage in, have been engaged in at least ever since William Penn founded Pennsylvania. We believe that there can be such a thing as good, responsive, just government. But, there are sharp teeth out there among people who don't share our perspective, either of faith or of political view.
Thank you. Hassan?
You should come back and work at FCNL again. We could use you. So what gives me hope? This is a hard question right now. I'm not gonna lie. I would urge that everyone take a little bit of self-care right now, especially after what happened to Aaron Bushnell. FCNL put a statement out. This was the U.S. Air Force active duty service member who self-immolated in front of the Israeli embassy as an act of protest to call for the end to the genocide of Palestinians and to free Palestine and end the slaughter. And it just is a reminder that a lot of people are struggling. So I wanted to say that. What gives me hope really is, one, the groundswell of support. We know that we are the majority. 80% of Democrats want a ceasefire. 66% of independents want a ceasefire. 56% of Republicans want a ceasefire. So we really are the majority. And then the rest of the world, the global South wants a ceasefire. I mean, it's really just a groundswell. It's just the obvious thing that we need. So that to me gives me hope. And I know someday, hopefully sooner than later, we will get a ceasefire. And so this community, this network, the Quaker community, our 80 plus national ceasefire coalition gives me hope. The 500,000, folks in the FCNL network that sent emails calling for a ceasefire gives me hope. And also the people we met across Palestine and Israel, the peace activists, the people that are still showing up for each other, groups like Combatants for Peace, B'Tselem, Gisha, groups like Al-Haq, DCIP Palestine, the Ramallah Friends School. So there are just incredible people out there. And, I'm just so grateful and humbled to be a part of this large and growing movement.
And what's your call to action, Hassan?
Oh, wow, I forgot the best part. Okay. We have a ceasefire toolkit. I would love for everybody on this call to take an action on there. You can write an LTE. You can do a drop-by visit on your member of Congress. And honestly, this is the week. We haven't really got into this, but my deepest fear right now is that we go into Ramadan, March 10th, without a ceasefire or truce agreement. This is such a scary moment, because if that happens, Gaza is one thing, Al-Aqsa, West Bank, Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, we could see a much larger conflagration of violence if we do not get this ceasefire. So ceasefire toolkit, a letter to the editor, write your paper, write your member of Congress, make a phone call action. And if you have a Quaker meeting, please try to get those minutes. Those are huge. So that's the best way to plug in. And we need your voices this week more than ever.
Thanks. And I'll just wrap up with my hope and call. My hope, certainly Hassan El-Tayyab gives me hope, and Jonathan Evans and Jim and Deb and Lauren and everyone on this call gives me hope. And I would echo what Hassan said about being there in the region, the resilience of people there who are continuing to choose peace with justice. Israelis, Palestinians, people across the broader region who are still insisting that human rights apply to all, that nonviolence is a path forward. That's tremendously powerful, and the resilience in the region, I think, will continue to give us all hope, and will find the way forward. And I think also the solidarity that we all feel and that we are all actively taking part in gives me a lot of hope. This network, as Hassan has said, has been tremendous in responding, both in advocacy and in providing financial support for our work. Thank you. Please continue that as well. We need it. We continue to need it. And continue the advocacy with us. And this is also, I think, part of as you've heard, a very long and continuing trajectory of Quaker commitment to working for peace with justice in solidarity with people in the Middle East. And so continuing to just be present and be part of that is both a call and a gift.
Thank you very much to all of you, and thank you to an audience who has been patient as we have gone over, because there is so much to say. And I am so glad we are recording this so that people who had to leave can still watch the recording. I want to share that this event is a Quaker Changemaker event, which is a series that we do at FCNL. And Bridget and Hassan also just gave a full report on their trip and the lessons from their recent trip 2 weeks ago, and that is also available on FCNL's website. So for people who wanted more of a deep dive into the trip, that is available, and we can get that to you. Again, Lindsay, if you could put in the chat, quakers@fcnl.org, that is our place that anyone can write to if you need any follow-up from our Quaker engagement team at FCNL, and I'm happy to help respond to some of those messages as well as needed. I wanted to alert people that we will have a new action alert out, so a new opportunity for advocacy. We're looking at next week that coming out, so please keep an eye on our website, especially fcnl.org/ceasefire, for that to be a new opportunity to take action. And I also wanted to alert people to the fact that we are doing an all FCNL community book club read of Light in Gaza, which is AFSC publication with stories from people living in Gaza. We so much want to center the voices of people in the region throughout our advocacy work. And so that is one of the ways that we're doing it. And that will be in April that we're reading and discussing Light in Gaza, but people can get started on that now, and it's available entirely online for free. So if you look up Light in Gaza, you can find the link to that. And with that, I will thank everyone. Thank you to our wonderful panelists. Again, anyone who needs to leave is welcome to head out at this time, but we will show this video of the students at Ramallah Friends School as we close as the final voices in our program.
I hope for a ceasefire in Gaza because there are children that are hungry, without a home, that are just like me. They deserve to live in peace with their families and go to school and live safely and healthy.
Over 30,000 people have been killed in Gaza, and over half of them are children. Some have dreams, maybe like mine.
Half of the population of Gaza are children. 1 million children in Gaza. So that is why I support a ceasefire for the children.
As a Palestinian student, seeing all these lifeless bodies of students and children carried out of rubble of their homes that they were just trying to shelter in, like, brings me sadness. I'm so grateful that I still have a mother. I still have clean water. I still have food to eat. I still have a home, because these children in Gaza, they don't have any of that.
Thank you so much. And that video is also available on our Instagram. And I think there was a little bit more with a second question there that what we just showed was a good preview. And I think for many of us, young people are the inspiration or the hope. And so what a wonderful note to end on with they're talking about why they care and can help us to share that inspiration throughout the communities that we are a part of as we advocate for a permanent ceasefire and a just peace for Israel and Palestine. Thank you, everyone. Good night.